Welcome back to the Bible in 90 Days. We're on day 35. We're reading through the book of Nehemiah, and we're almost gonna get through the book of Esther with it. It's a short story, a shorter story, something you can read just sitting down. If you wanted to pick up your Bible one day and just read a short story, you might turn to Esther. But in Nehemiah's reforms in the time of Esther, they're about the same time. Esther would have been one of the remnant that decided to stay in Susa, in Persia, and her family and her with her uncle Mordecai and those things. See that they'd grown up in Persia, and that's what they knew. And what you grow up with is what you feel comfortable with. I couldn't imagine being a Jew born in captivity, as some are. Zerubbabel. His name actually means born in captivity. He was the king. He was a descendant of Solomon, but he was born in captivity. He was born in Babylon, and there's a lot of people that were born in Babylon during the 70 years that they were there. And some of them wanted to return to Jerusalem, and some of them didn't. Some of them wanted to stay where they were. Well, and that's kind of what we have in the story of Esther. I'll give us a short intermission in the middle there, where we start to discuss that book in just a little bit before we start reading it. But let's jump into the Word today. We're in Nehemiah chapter 10, and it ends at chapter 13, so we got about 3 chapters to go. Nehemiah chapter 10. Those who sealed it were. Let me back up just a little bit and reread that last verse. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement, and we'll put it in writing, that our leaders and our Levites and our priests are affixing to their seals to it. Those who sealed it were Nehemiah the governor, the son of Hakaliah, Zedekiah, Seraiah, Azariah, Jeremiah, Pashur, Amariah, Milkijah, Hittush, Shebaniah, Maluk, Harim, Merimoth, Obadiah, Daniel, Ginnethon, Baruch, Meshullam, Abijah, Mijamin, Maaziah, Bilgai, and Shemaiah. These were the priests, the Levites. Jeshua, son of Azaniah, Binu, the sons of Henadad and Kadmiel, and their associates, Shebaniah, Hodiah, Kelita, Peliah, Hanan, Micah, Rehob, Hashbiah, Zakur, Sherebiah, Shebaniah, Hodiah, Bani, and Beninu, the leaders of the people. Parosh, Pehath, Moab, Elam, Zatu, Bani, Buni, Asgad, Bebai, Adonijah, I should know that one, Bigvai, Adin, Ater, Hezekiah, Azur, Hodiah, Hashum, Bezai, Marif, Anathoth, Nebai, Magpiash, Meshulam, Hezir, Meshzabel, Zadok, Jadua, Pelatiah, Hanan, Ananiah, Halohesh, Pilha, Shobek, Rehum, Hashabana, Maaseiah, Ahia, Anan, Maluk, Harim, and Bana. Verse 28. The rest of the people, priests, Levites, gatekeepers, musicians, temple servants, and all who separated themselves from the neighboring peoples for the sake of the law of God, together with their wives and all their sons and daughters, were able to understand. All these now were their fellow Israelites, the nobles, and bind themselves with a curse and an oath to follow the law of God given through Moses, the servant of God, and to obey carefully all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord our God. We promise not to give our daughters in marriage to the peoples around us, or to take their daughters for our sons. Verse 31. When all the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath, nor or on a holy day. Every 7th year we will forego working the land and cancel all debts. Verse 32. We assume the responsibility for carrying out the commands to give 1/3 of a shekel each year for the service of the house of our God, for the bread set out on the table, for the regular grain offerings and burnt offerings, for the offerings on the Sabbaths, at the new moon feasts, in the appointed festivals, for the holy offerings, for sin offerings, to make atonement for Israel and for all the duties of the house of our God. Verse 34. We, the priests, the Levites, and the people, have cast lots to determine when each of our families is to bring to the house of our God at set times each year a contribution of wood to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. Verse 35. We also assume responsibility for bringing to the house of the Lord each year the first fruits of our crops, of every fruit tree. Verse 36. As it is also written in the law, we will bring the firstborn of our sons and our cattle, of our herds and of our flocks to the house of our God, to the priests ministering there. Verse 37. Moreover, we will bring to the storerooms of the house of our God, to the priests, the first of our ground meal, of our grain offerings, the fruit of all our trees, and our new wine and olive oil. And we will bring a tithe of our crops to the Levites, for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in all the towns where we work. A priest descended from Aaron is to accompany the Levites when they receive the tithes, and the Levites are to bring 1/10 of the tithes up to the house of our God, to the storerooms of the treasury. The people of Israel, including the Levites, are to bring their contributions of grain, new wine, and olive oil to the storerooms, where the articles for the sanctuary, and the ministering priests, the gatekeepers, and the musicians are also kept. We will not neglect the house of our God. Chapter 11. Now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem. The rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of every 10 of them to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the remaining 9 were to stay in their own towns. The people commended all who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. Verse 3. These are the providential leaders who settled in Jerusalem. Now some Israelites, priests, Levites, temple servants, and the descendants of Solomon's servants lived in the towns of Judah, each on their own property in the various towns, while other people from both Judah and Benjamin lived in Jerusalem. Athaiah, the son of Uzziah, the son of Zechariah, the son of Amariah, the son of Shephatiah, the son of Mahalalel, a descendant of Perez, Maaseiah, and Maaseiah, son of Baruch, the son of Kol-Hoseh, the son of Haziah, the son of Adiah, the son of Joiarib, the son of Zechariah, a descendant of Shelah. The descendants of Perez, who lived in Jerusalem, totaled 468 men of standing. Verse 7. From the descendants of Benjamin, Shalu, son of Mishallum, the son of Joed, the son of Pedaiah, the son of Kolaiah, the son of Maaseiah, the son of Ethiel, the son of Jeshiah, and his followers, Gabi and Salai, 928 men. Joel, son of Zichri, was their chief officer, and Judah, son of Hasanua, was over the new quarter of the city. Verse 10. From the priests, Jediah, son of Joiarib, Jachin, Seraiah, son of Hilkai, the son of Meshullam, the son of Zadok, the son of Meroith, the son of Ahitub, the official in charge of the house of God, and their associates who carried on the work for the temple, 822 men. Adiah, son of Jehoram, the son of Pelaliah, the son of Amzi, the son of Zechariah, the son of Pashhur, the son of Malchijah, and his associates were the heads, who were heads of the families, 242 men. Amashai, son of Azarel, the son of Ahzai, the son of Meshillamoth, the son of Emer, and his associates, who were men of standing, 128. Their chief officer was Zabdiel, son of Hagedolim. Verse 15. From the Levites, Shemaiah, son of Hashub, the son of Azrikam, the son of Hashabiah, the son of Buni. 16. Shabiatha and Jozabad, two of the heads of the Levites who had charge outside of the work of the house of God. Mattaniah, son of Micah, the son of Zabdi, the son of Asaph, the director who led in thanksgiving and prayer. Bakbukiah, second among his associates, and Abda, son of Shammua, the son of Galal, the son of Jeduthun. The Levites in the holy city totaled 284. Verse 19, the gatekeepers. Akub, Talmon, and their associates who kept watch at the gates, 172 men. The rest of the Levites, with the priests and Levites, were all in the towns of Judah, each on their ancestral property. The temple servants lived in the hill of Ophel, Ziha, and Gishpa, were in charge of them. 22. The chief officer of the Levites in Jerusalem was Uzzi, son of Bani, the son of Hashabiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micah. Uzzi was one of Asaph's descendants, who were musicians responsible for the service of the house of God. The musicians were under the king's orders, which regulated their daily activity. Verse 24. Pethahiah, son of Meshezabel, one of the descendants of Zerah, son of Judah, was the king's agent in all affairs relating to the people. Verse 25. As for the villages with their fields, some of the people of Judah lived in Kirath Arba, and its surrounding settlements, in Dibon and its settlements, in Jekabziel and its villages, in Jeshua and Moladah, in Beth Pelet, in Hazar Shual, in Beersheba and its settlements, in Ziklag and Mikona and its settlements, in En-Rimmon, in Zorah, in Jarmuth, Zanoah, Adulam and their village, and their villages, in Lachish and its fields, and Azekah and its settlements. So they were living all the way from Beersheba to the valley of Hinnom. Verse 31. The descendants of the Benjamites from Geba lived in Michmash, Aijah, Bethel, and its settlements, in Anathoth, Nob, and Ananiah, in Hazor, Ramah, and Gitaim, and in Hadid, Ziboim, and Nebalat, in Lod and Ono, and in Gerashah, Jeharashim. Verse 36. Some of the divisions of the Levites of Judah settled in Benjamin. Chapter 12. These are the rest of the Levites who returned with Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and with Joshua: Seraiah, Jeremiah, Ezra, Amariah, Maluk, Hattush, Zechariah, Rehum, Meremoth, Iddo, Ginnathoth, Abijah, Mijamin, Moadiah, Bilgah, Shemaiah, Joiarib, Jediah, Shalu, Amok, Hilkiah, and Jedaiah. These were the leaders of the priests and their associates in the days of Joshua. Verse 8. The Levites were Jeshua bin Ui, Kadmiel, Sherebiah, Judah, also Mittaniah, who together with his associates was in charge of the songs of thanksgiving. Bakbukiah and Uni, their associates, stood opposite of them in services. Joshua was the father of Joachim, and Joachim the father of Eliashib, Eliashib the father of Joiada, Joiada the father of Jonathan, and Jonathan the father of Jaddua. In the days of Joachim, these were the heads of their priestly families: of Sarai's family, Meraiah; of Jeremiah's, Hananiah; of Ezra's, Meshullam; of Amariah's, Jehohanan; of Maluk's, Jonathan; of Shechaniah's, Joseph; of Harim's, Adnah; of Meremoth's, Helkiah; of Iddo's, Zechariah; of Ginnathoth, Meshullam; of Abijah's, Zechari; of Minamin's and Moadiah's, Piltai; of Bilgah; of Bilgah's, Shammua; of Shemaiah's, Jonathan; of Joiarib's, Mattaniah; of Jedaiah's, Uzi; of Shalu's, Kalai; of Amok's, Eber; of Hilkiah's, Hashabiah; of Jedaiah's, Nethanel. Verse 22. The family heads of the Levites in the days of Eliashib, Joiada, Johanan, and Jaddua, as well as those of the priests, were recorded in the reign of Darius the Persian. The family heads among the descendants of Levi up to the time of Jonathan, son of Eliashib, were recorded in the books of the annals. And the leaders of the Levites were Hashabiah, Sherebiah, Jeshua, son of Kadmiel, and their associates, who stood opposite of them to give praise and thanksgiving, one section responding to the other, as prescribed by David, the man of God. Verse 25. Mattaniah, Bakbukiah, Obadiah, Meshullam, Talmon, and Akub were gatekeepers who guarded the storerooms at the gates. They served in the days of Joachim, son of Joshua, the son of Jozadak, and in the days of Nehemiah, the governor, and of Ezra the priest, the teacher of the law. Verse 27. At the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The musicians were brought together from the region around Jerusalem, from the village of the Netophathites, from Beth Gilgal, and from the area of Jeba and Azamaveth. For the musicians had built villages for themselves around Jerusalem. When the priests and Levites had purified themselves ceremonially, they purified the people, the gates, and the wall. I had the leaders of Judah go up on top of the wall. I also assigned 2 large choirs to give thanks. One was to proceed up to the top, proceed on top of the wall to the right, toward the dung gate. Hoshea and half of the leaders of Judah followed them, along with Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, Jeremiah, as well as some of the priests with trumpets, and also Zechariah, son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, the son of Zakur, the son of Asaph, and his associates, Shemaiah, Azarel, Milalai, Gilalai, Nathanael, and Judah and Hanani, with musical instruments prescribed by David, the man of God. Ezra, the teacher of the law, led the procession. Verse 37, at the fountain gate, they continued directly up the steps of the city of David on the ascent to the wall, and passed above the site of David's palace to the water gate on the east. Verse 38. The second choir proceeded in the opposite direction. I followed them. When he's saying I, he's saying Nehemiah. Nehemiah is this is all written in the first person. I followed them on top of the wall together with half of the people past the tower of ovens on the broad wall, over the gate of Ephraim, the Jeshana gate, the fish gate, the tower of Hananel, the tower of the 100, as far as the sheep gate. At the gate of the guard they stopped. Verse 40. 2 choirs that gave thanks then took their places in the house of God. So did I, together with the half of the officials, as well as Micaiah, Eloi and I, Zechariah and Hananiah, with their trumpets, also Maaseiah, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzi, Jehohanan, Melchijah, Elam, and Ezer. The choirs sang under the direction of Jerezahiah, and on that day they offered great sacrifices, rejoicing because God had given them great joy. The women and children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing in Jerusalem could be heard far away. Verse 44. At that time men were appointed to be in charge of the storerooms for the contributions, first fruits, and tithes. From the fields around the towns, they were to bring into the storerooms the portions required by the law for the priests and the Levites. For Judah was pleased with the ministering priests and Levites. They performed the service of their God and the service of purification, as did also the musicians and gatekeepers according to the commands of David and his son Solomon. For long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there had been directors for the musicians and for the songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. So in the days of Zerubbabel and of Nehemiah, all Israel contributed the daily portions for the musicians and the gatekeepers. They also set aside the portion for the other Levites. And the Levites set aside the portion for the descendants of Aaron. Chapter 13. On that day, the book of Moses was read aloud in the hearing of the people, and there it was found written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever be admitted into the assembly of God, because they had not met the Israelites with food and water, but had hired Balaam to call a curse down on them. Our God, however, turned the curse into a blessing. Verse 3. When the people heard this law, they excluded from Israel all who were of foreign descent. Before this, Eliashib the priest had been put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. He was closely associated with Tobiah, and he had provided him with a large room formerly he used to store grain offerings and incense and the temple articles. And he also the tithes of grain and new wine and olive oil prescribed for the Levites, musicians and gatekeepers, as well as the contributions for the priests. Verse 6. But while all of this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. For the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Sometime later, I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God. I was greatly displeased and threw all Tobiah's household goods out of the room. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God, with the grain offerings and the incense. Verse 10. I also learned that the portions assigned to the Levites had not been given to them, that all the Levites and musicians responsible for the service had gone back to their own fields. So I rebuked the officials and asked them, "Why is the house of God neglected?" Then I called them together and stationed them at their posts. All Judah had brought tithes of grain, new wine, and olive oil into the storerooms. I put Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and a Levite named Pedaiah, in charge of the storerooms, and made Hanan, son of Zakur, the son of Mattaniah, their assistant, because they were considered trustworthy. They were made responsible for distributing the supplies to their fellow Levites. Verse 14. Remember me for this, my God, and do not blot out what I have so faithfully done for the house of my God and its services. Verse 15. In those days I saw people in Judah treading the winepress on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading it on donkeys, together with wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, and all other kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Therefore I warned them against selling food on that day. People from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem on the Sabbath, and to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this wicked thing you're doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same things, and so that your God brought all this calamity on us and his city? Now you are stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath." Verse 19. When the evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no load could be brought in on the Sabbath day. Once or twice the merchants and sellers of all kinds of goods spent the night outside Jerusalem. But I warned them and said, "Why do you spend the night by the wall? If you do this again, I will arrest you." From that time on, they no longer came on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember me for this also, my God, and show mercy to me according to your great love. Verse 23. Moreover, in these days I saw men of Judah who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod or the language of one of the other peoples, and did not know how to speak the language of Judah. I rebuked them and called curses down on them. I beat some of the men and pulled out their hair. I made some of them take an oath in God's name and said, "You are not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons or for yourselves." Verse 26. Was it not because of the marriages like these that Solomon the king of Israel sinned? Among the many nations there was no king like him. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. But even he was led into sin by foreign women. Must we hear now that you are doing this terrible wickedness, and are being unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women? Verse 28. One of the sons of Joiada, son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat, the Horonite, and I drove him away from me. Verse 29. Remember them, my God, because they defile the priestly office and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Verse 30. So I purified the priests and the Levites of everything foreign, and I assigned them duties, each to his own task, and I also made provision for contributions of wood at designated times, and for the first fruits. Remember me with favor, my God. One of the sad things about Nehemiah, that's kind of his epitaph. Remember me, my God. He was on a good note, he was worried about what God thought about him, and he fought for those things. Israel had been defiled. It had already been defiled, and God was allowing them to come back. And this is kind of, I think that this mindset, this worry, now I'm not saying that he was doing wrong by keeping the things pure, but what's done is done. I can't speak for God, but I don't think that God would have wanted them to leave their wives once they had children and things like that. But they should have fought to recover the people and the things of the people in a way that took care of everyone. I mean, who knows what happened to those women and children that got run away? And their fathers still cared for them, and then people were going out afterwards and going back to what they were used to doing. It's really, this is the human condition, and God had called these people to be holy. But once they were defiled, once Babylon came and took Jerusalem, Jerusalem was defiled. The people of God had been defiled. And you can't bring something that's been defiled back to a perfect state. You can bring it back to a recovered state, and that's what the goal should have been. Well, now we're in the book of Esther. Esther is a wonderful story, but one thing that you should notice when we read through Esther is that this is the one book of the Bible where God is not mentioned at all. He is not mentioned, but he's everywhere in it. God is working all through this story, but you don't hear of him mentioned at all. This is in Persia. Okay, this is 100 years into the exile. So, like I was saying earlier, you have people, you know, when Xerxes said that the people can go back to Jerusalem, it was by choice. It was people that wanted to go back. They weren't all made to go back, and they weren't all asked to go back, but the people who went back on their own. Now, Vashti, who was her parents, I don't know what happened to her parents, but she was pretty much being raised by her uncle Mordecai. And we're going to learn about that in the story, but it's just a cool Cinderella story. It's a beautiful Cinderella story. Now, Xerxes, man, Xerxes is just I couldn't imagine living in these times. Okay, and I'm not going to tell you what Xerxes is. You figure it out when we read the story. Esther, chapter 1. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes, who ruled over 127 providences, stretching from India to Kush. That's from India to Africa. Okay. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, and in the 3rd year of his reign he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials, the military leaders of Persia and Media. The princes, and the nobles of the providences were present. Verse 4, for a full 180 days he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor of glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days, and in the enclosed garden of the king's palace, for all the people from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white, of blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material, to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver, and on a mosaic pavement of porphyry marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, and each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. The king commanded each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions. The king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Verse 9. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, King Xerxes was high in spirits from wine, and he commanded the 7 eunuchs who served him, Mehuman, Bizthia, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zethar, and Carcas, to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and the nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come, and the king became furious and burned with anger. Verse 13. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king. Karshina, Shethar, and Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king, and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes, and that the eunuchs have taken to her. Verse 16. Then Memucan replied in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against the nobles and the peoples of all the providences of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all women, and they will despise their husbands, and say, King Xerxes commanded the queen Vashti to be brought before him. But she would not come. Verse 18. This very day, the Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Verse 19. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. And also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict was proclaimed throughout all this vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. Verse 21. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice, so the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, each providence in its own script, and to each people in their own language, proclaiming that every man should be ruler over his own household, using his native tongue. Chapter 2. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners of every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women into the harem of the citadel of Susa, and let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. And let beauty treatments be given them, and let the young women who please let the young woman who pleases the king be the queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was, in verse 5, now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Verse 8. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, that many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 female attendants, selected from the king's palace, and moved her and her attendants into the best place of the harem. Verse 10. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Verse 12. Before a young woman's turn to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 with perfumes and cosmetics. This is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go there, and in the morning she would return to another part of the harem and to take care of Sha'ashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. 15. When the turn came for Esther, the young woman Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than that Haggai, the king's eunuch, was in charge of the harem, who was in charge of the harem, had suggested. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Verse 17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials, and he proclaimed a holiday throughout the providences and distributed gifts with royal liberality. Verse 19. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instruction as she had done when he was bringing her up. Verse 21. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana with Teresh and 2 of the king's officers who guarded the doorway became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, 2 officials were impaled on poles, and this was the record in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. Chapter 3. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Verse 3. When the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore he told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. Verse 7. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, at the first month, the month of Nisan, the pure, that is, the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and a month. And the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among these people in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all other people. They do not obey the king's laws. It is not the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." Verse 10. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Verse 12. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out the script of each province, and in the language of each people of all Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various providences, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's providences in order with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued from the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. Chapter 4. Then Mordecai learned of all that had been done. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. When Mordecai had learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict in order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 4. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, and assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. Verse 6. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money that Haman promised to pay to the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Verse 8. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and to explain it to her. And she told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Verse 9. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. So she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the things the officials and people of the royal providences know, that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. Verse 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent her back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house you are alone, alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this? Verse 15. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Verse 17. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Chapter 5. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be given you. Verse 4. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, Let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Verse 5. Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do what Esther asks. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Verse 9. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends, Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways that the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him before all other nobles and officials. "And that's not all," Haman added. "I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to a banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate." Verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself." This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. Chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought and read to him. It was found in record that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak with the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. Verse 6. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with the royal crest placed on its head, and then let the robe of the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man in the king's delights to honor, and to lead him on the horse throughout the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" Verse 10. "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." Verse 11. So Haman got the robe and the horse, and he robed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Verse 12. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. He told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before your downfall has started, of his Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While uh, while there while there is still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to his banquet Esther had prepared. Chapter 7. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given. What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be granted." Verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Verse 5. King Xerxes asked Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage and left his wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Verse 8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "He will even molest the queen while she is with me in the house." I'm sorry. Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? That was a question. I didn't see the question mark. As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had it erected for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told him how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Verse 3. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. Verse 5. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor and thinks the right thing to do, if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's providences. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" Verse 7. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther to Mordecai the Jew, "Because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have him impaled on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as it seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document was written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." Verse 9. At once the royal secretaries were summoned, and on the 20th day of the third month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews, and to the satraps, the governors, and nobles of the 127 providences stretching from India to Kush. These orders were written in the script of each providence and in the language of each people, so and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote on the name in the name of King Xerxes, and sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring. And he sent them by mounted couriers, who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. Verse 11. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, to plunder the property of their enemies, Dude, that's the Second Amendment on steroids. Americans will get that. Verse 12. The day of the appointed for the Jews to do this in all the providence of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. Verse 14. The couriers riding the royal horses went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Verse 15. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and every city which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many of the people of their nationalities became Jews because of the fear of the Jews had seized them. Chapter 9. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out on this day. The enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities and all the providences of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because of all the people, all the other nationalities were afraid of them. And all the nobles of the providences, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because of the fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace, and his reputation spread throughout the providences, and he became more and more powerful. Verse 5. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshadanatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Poradatha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arasia, Aradai, Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Verse 11. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king the same day. The king said to on the same day, the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's providences? Now, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted. 13. If it pleases the king, Esther answered, give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles. 14. So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day in the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men. but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. 16. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's providences also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And on the 14th day, they rested and made a day of feasting and joy. Made it a day of feasting and joy. Verse 18. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th day and 14th, and then on the 15th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews living in the villages observe the 14th month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. Verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar. At this time, when the Jews got relief, this is the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month of their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote to them to observe as the days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another as gifts, and gifts to the poor. 23. So the Jews agreed to continue and celebrate the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. 24. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and to cast the pur, pure, that is the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued the written orders that the evil scheme of Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, for the word pure, because of everything that was written in his letter, and because what they had seen and what happened to them. The Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom, and they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed at the appointed time. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation, by every family, and in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim, should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out with their descendants. 29. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, the words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim and at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records. Chapter 10. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai, the Jew, was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. That's it. We begin tomorrow in the book of Job. That's all for today. Job is an incredible literary story. Going back to Esther, though, notice that even though God wasn't mentioned in the pages of Esther, he was all through that story working and working, and it was just great. That's one of my favorite stories. I really enjoy reading Persian stories. There's a Greek book I have that's about Persia and about the 300, and it's about that same time, when Persia got destroyed by Greece, when they sent millions of ships out to Greece, and Greece destroyed them all, and they couldn't do it, and then eventually Greece took over all of Persia. Whenever history is really really cool. It's frightening to read some history and stuff, but you had that time. And then when we get into Daniel, you see the prophecies that Daniel talks about, and that's 100 years before this, or at least 50 years before this, when Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, and then Darius. See, I think Darius was also entitled Xerxes. I think all the king. I'm not sure. I think that all the kings of Persia were called Xerxes, but Darius and Cyprus, or Cyrus, were also known as Xerxes. Um, I think Xerxes is like the title for a king, and all of those things get confused when we cross language barriers. If you really want to learn everything, you have to learn some other languages too, and you really still can't know them. But I don't know, man. The Bible is just awesome. It's full of stuff. It's full of great things, and just it leads to more questions. The more you study it, the more questions you have, and the more things you want answered. And we're really just raising a whole bunch of questions now, aren't we? We're reading the whole Bible in 90 days. Well, guys, God loves you. I love you too. Join us again tomorrow. We'll get into the book of Job.